The Seer of Frain. Written and read by Dan Sandoval. The rider's horse came to an exhausted halt, froth steaming around its shaking muzzle. The hour was high moon, but only the dim emerald glow of the orb in the hooded man's hand lit the low street. After dismounting, he paused for a moment, listening, watching. He silenced the green light from the glass and tucked it into his cloak. No one could know he was here. It was for this reason that Graydon Marsh tied his ebony stallion to a hitching post, tucked in the adjacent alley, and stayed in the shadows. Being a highly respected man of business in the town of Frain, to even be seen on the low streets at high moon could only draw certain conclusions. He quickly made his way to the seer's door and hesitated to knock, but the voice came before he could strike the ancient black wood. "The hour is late for seeing things, sir." It rasped like a ghostly broken bellows. "Please, I must know something about my business venture tomorrow. I can't sleep," Marsh lied. Silence for a moment. Then the door opened, and Graydon slipped in with one last glance over his shoulder. The seer was dressed in black robes of his trade, a necklace containing various bones, symbols, and what Graydon thought to be a human eye was draped around his thin, ash-powdered neck. The seer's face was like a road map of the river country, thickly lined and creased, the face of a man who had seen much of this world and others. Dark eyes that had peered into the emptiness of the din over many a long year. Graydon made to remove his hood when the holy man spoke again. "Why do you lie to a seer, Lord Marsh?" he said, and before Graydon could answer his query, another came. "You have sinned again, haven't you?" Graydon looked down at his usually well-polished leather boots, now muddy from the low streets, and said nothing. The seer was also silent as he glided almost soundlessly by him and toward a table where the wizard's eye slept, shrouded. The golden orb sat beneath a strange velvet purple cloth stitched with more arcane symbols, like those in the seer's hideous neck chain. "Please, Graydon started. "Wasn't your fault this time." The seer finished his thought with a hint of a smile creeping from the corner of his thin lips. Marsh felt his knees go weak at this, and reached for the curved doorway to steady himself against his rising nausea. He had expelled his supper earlier in the evening before setting out for the seer, and now he felt that he would retch again. "Fear not, Lord Marsh. Your stomach is empty." The seer paused and tilted his head like a bird, listening for a moment, one wraith-like hand suspended over the table. "However rare it is, seers can be wrong." Then Valan the Elder reached down below the table and brought forth a small water pail and passed it over to Lord Graydon Marsh, who took it with quite unsteady hands. "Perhaps I will see dimly, perhaps not." Graydon stared at the pail and willed himself to vomit, but nothing came, although the bile pooled bitterly in his throat. The seer had seated himself upon his stool and motioned for Marsh to take the seat across from him, as was the custom. Valan whispered in rasps the summoning words, and the room's lamps shuddered and grew faint. When the velvet cloth was pulled back from the glass sphere, the silvery golden orb seemed to draw the light into itself like breath. Obscure images began to form in the crystal. They swirled into focus for a moment, only to twist again in the shifting light that pulsed from within. A woman in the throes of passion with a lover, another man's wife, a flash of steel, blood spatters, and then Graydon's own horrified face, as it had been less than half moon before the hour. "Indeed, you have sinned deeply, Lord Marsh," The seer spoke with his white eyes fixed somewhere deep inside the seeing glass. I loved her, but she would not leave him. We quarreled. I tried to wrest the blade from her hands, but it found her body instead. He found us like this, and I killed only in self-defense. Graydon replied as he began to weep. If I'm discovered, I will be hanged. Please, you. What must I do? He pleaded. The mystic glow ebbed once again at his tears, and the seer passed his ashen hands over and again, as a potter shaping clay on a wheel. The reaping hand comes for you tonight. Nothing can be done to stay it. Your sins have paid for death, and death cannot be denied its price. At these words, the light leapt from the globe and back into the lamps as the seer quickly shrouded it once more, his own eyes shifting from white to black. Graydon stood and pounded upon the table with fists like a child in a tantrum. No, that cannot be. I was not to blame. It was out of love that this came to be. There must be more to this vision. There must be. Look again, Seer. You must. He pouted with fresh tears welling up and his voice cracking. At this outburst, the seer said nothing. He only sat looking at Graydon, as though his eyes could see his very soul. A noise came from behind him, and a smaller, shrouded man peered from beneath gray robes, apprentice seer. Master, do you have need of me? I heard shouting, said the soft voice of the youth. No, my young seeker. Return to your meditations. Lord Marsh was just leaving us. The seer spoke with calm assurance. The youth bowed and disappeared back into the shadows. Graydon's anger was visible as he moved towards the door. You are no true seer. You are nothing but a parlor magician. My sins are no fault of mine, and before he could finish ranting, the seer rose from the stool and into the air in full levitation, his dark eyes burning bright with light once again. Once more the lamps fell silent, and the room was plunged into a sweeping darkness. The shuttered windows rattled and the floor shook beneath. The ghost-like embodiment whirled toward Graydon, hovering inches from his shocked face. I am a true seer, you worm. I have seen the before and the after, and more than your pitiful weeping eyes could ever know, which after this moon's fall shall be no more. One skeletal hand pressed its forefinger to Marsh's head, and he screamed as though cut to the bone. Your sin's wage is death, and death will draw you from wherever you hide. Doubt not my words, Lord Marsh. The finger withdrew, and Graydon Marsh, screaming in agony, found himself not in the room of the eye, but in his own bed. In his estate near the marsh, where his father and many before him had been raised in the old ways, he sat bolt upright, his heart pounding in his chest, a cold sweat dripping from his brow. Only a nightmare. But how? And what of Saphira and her husband? Did they still live? None of it passed. The thoughts raced through his mind as he rose from his bed, where beside him lay Zeneca, his wife of 22 seasons. He rushed from the room, dressing quickly. He donned his hooded riding cloak and slipped on his muddy boots outside. All must be well. It is still high moon out, so I must have dreamed it all. His mind was now resting more at ease as he pulled his stallion to a halt just outside Saphira's home, tying the great beast to its familiar tree just off the roadside. Nothing stirred near the quaint country manor that the two had visited so often on nights like these. Graydon's heart burned for his lover's embrace as he went to the cellar door left unlocked just for their rendezvous. He came breathless to the room, expecting to steal silently into her bed, only to be met with a scene like one of his nightmare. Utter horror, and the echoing voice of the seer gripped him as he stared at the man holding Saphira's limp, crimson-stained form. He screamed aloud and rushed towards them. The other man looked up at the sound, drew his blade, and in a swift thrust ended Lord Marsh's life. Graydon staggered, clutching his side, and slumped against the wall to his right. With his hooded face shrouded in darkness, he looked up into the face of death, the face which was his own. Then he faded from existence and back into the den.